镜头光晕、气象气球、视错觉、沼气。这些现象可以解释并快速推翻95%的不明飞行物目击事件，但另外5%的事件拥有充足的目击者和证据，需要被认真对待。莱斯利·基恩研究这些事件已有10几年，重点调查最可靠的证据和目击者。
I've worked with high-level officials, pilots, generals, and a former U.S. governor to show that there is a physical phenomenon that exists.
A huge triangular object,
dark gray oval.
Like a frisbee? Like a UFO type thing.
如今，录音、雷达记录以及首次披露的目击证词等新证据，让人们重新开始重视这5%的事件。
It's time to correct the record once and for all. 大部分目击报告都来自民众，仅少数几件有1、2名确凿的目击者，这些报告很容易推翻。1980年，在一处装备着核武器的美国军事基地，60多名空军人员均目击到不明飞行物，时间长达45分钟，这就急需深入调查了。
Here we have a senior officer making a report of a UFO directly over the most important base in the whole NATO network, and there's no response to him. I found that absolutely astounding.
如今30年过去了，当年的重要目击者主动讲述了这段传奇经历。
The team and witnesses were told to treat the investigation as top secret, and no further discussion would be allowed.
这就是离奇的蓝道深森林事件。
My name is Colonel Charles Halt. In 1980, I was a deputy base commander at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, England. At that time, Bentwaters was the largest tactical fighter wing in the free world, and our mission as a key NATO installation was to be prepared should anything happen. Early in the morning of the 26th of December, I went in to collect the police blotters. That's the chronological list of what happened the previous 24 hours. And as I walked into the office, the on-duty desk sergeant started to laugh. He said, "Colonel, you're not going to believe this. Last night, 3 of our policemen were out in the forest chasing UFOs. They called in and thought they saw a downed aircraft. They went out and investigated, and they had some type of an experience." I said, "We'll put something into the blotter to the effect that they saw some lights, and we'll leave it at that for now."
关于圣诞节晚上森林中出现的不明飞行物，基地中流言四起。短短几天之后，哈尔特就不得不采取行动制止这些传言了。
2 nights later, we were having the Christmas party, and we were just finishing the main course and getting ready for dessert when the on-duty flight lieutenant cornered the base commander and I and said, "We have to talk. The UFO is back." I was sure I could put this thing to rest. So I took my little pocket recorder, which I carried everywhere, an APN-27, which is a Geiger counter, and we went out into the forest.
1980年12月27日夜里，哈尔特上校带领一支3人小队来到2天前那个飞行物的降落地点，其中包括一位飞行指挥官和一位防灾专家。
Lo and behold, I find half our security force out there. 5, 6, 7 vehicles, jeeps, 6-passenger pickup trucks, and they're trying to light up the forest. Here I'm thinking, this is a public relations disaster just waiting to happen. So I tell them to knock it off, get as many people and things back to the base as they can. And with a little tape recorder, I took a small team into the forest to the alleged landing site.
We found a small blast, what looks like a scruffed up area here. We got very positive readings. See, is that here the center? Yes, it is.
在这个所谓的着陆地点，哈尔特和队员发现了3处呈三角形的压痕。
What kind of readings we got? Anything? Let's go 7 tenths there. 7 tenths right here in the center?
仪器显示，这里的核辐射量是正常标准的10倍，情况肯定比哈尔特的预想更复杂。
We find rub marks on the trees facing the site and quite a few broken branches on the ground. And when we looked up, we noticed a break in the tree canopy above us. It was obvious something had come up through or down through the trees. As we're investigating, we also hear the barnyard animals, the cows and the chickens, sort of went into a frenzy for a short period of time and then got very silent. And then somebody suddenly notices a glowing red object on the far side of the forest. And I immediately turned my tape recorder back on.
Where? Right at this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. This one, that's the edge of the clearing, so I can get a better look at it.
哈尔特和队员跑过去，直到近的能够看清这个物体的细节。
It was oval. This was all reddish orange. And there were like pieces of molten metal dripping off it, and they were falling to the ground. It had a black-like center. This was solid black, and this would actually like blink, almost like an eye. It moved horizontally through the trees, about 4 to 6 feet off the ground, zigzagging, bobbing up and down a little bit, as though they were searching for something, and it definitely was under some type of intelligent control.
哈尔特的描述和许多其他目击事件中的证词不谋而合。目击者经常声称看到红色球状物体，像在智能控制下四处探寻。不过，哈尔特和队员接下来的经历就不同寻常了。
We watched it for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And suddenly, it silently exploded into 5 white objects, and everything disappeared. Well, this really puts us all but in shock. I'm thinking, I'm never going to be able to explain this. People will never believe this. This is just too bizarre. Well, somebody in the party looks to the north and said, "Look, what's that?" And we see 4 or 5 objects that are elliptical with multicolored lights. Probably 3,000 or 4,000 feet in elevation, and they're moving at high speed with sharp angular movements. We hear a lot of chatter on the radios, and we were having difficulties the whole time, too. There was a lot of interference. Some say that sending down a beam into the weapons storage area, and we were all extremely nervous about what was happening.
Moving out fast. There's one on the right facing away, too. Yeah, let's head north. Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
Suddenly, one comes overhead and stops. It sends down a beam at our feet. When the beam came down, we stood perfectly still. I don't think anybody moved. Everybody just stood there in shock. And it's going through my mind, there has to be some type of a reason for this. Is this a communication? Is this a weapon? Is this a warning? What do we do now?
所有人瞠目结舌地看着悬在头顶的飞行物，这些训练有素的专业军人可从没见过这种景象。
Never seen anything like it. And while we're standing there, just as suddenly as it appeared, click, it's gone. I'm thinking, there is no real explanation for all of this. Why did I get involved? This is not exactly career enhancing.
报告显示，那2晚共有超过60名空军人员目击了不明飞行物，这就是蓝道申森林事件。
According to witnesses, this really shook up the base. This was during the Cold War. This was a nuclear-armed outpost, and it was an incursion, a national security concern to both the British and the Americans.
作为当时值班人员中的负责人，哈尔特需要向上级汇报整个事件。他简要整理了一份备忘录，希望就此了结此事。由于基地位于英国境内，该备忘录递交到了英国国防部。国防部很快认定该事件无关国防，就此结案。这件事因此搁置了10多年。
My name's Nick Pope. I worked for the Ministry of Defence for 21 years, and for much of the early 90s, I ran their UFO project. My job was to investigate sightings and determine whether there was evidence of any potential threat to the United Kingdom.
1994年，尼克波普对搁置已久的兰道申森林事件重新展开调查。
One of the things that prompted me was the apparent lack of any formal response to Colonel Holt's report. Here was one of the most senior officers ever to go on the record, making a report of a UFO landing in close proximity to two of the most important bases in the whole NATO network, and there's no response to him. I found that absolutely astounding.
波普开始了长达3年的详尽调查，他发现了许多当时调查中的重要问题，其中包括管辖权的混乱。
The Rendlesham Forest incident involved the twin bases, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Now, of course, these were United States Air Force bases, but on British soil. So there was total confusion about who was in charge. Another problem was that the landing site had not immediately been cordoned off. People were coming and going, contaminating the site. It should have been searched thoroughly with a metal detector. Soil samples should have been taken. This didn't happen.
经过几年的重新调查，波普发现了最初调查中一处最为致命的失误。
I was looking at the question of whether or not the UFO was tracked on radar. One of the witnesses said that for an instant there was an uncorrelated target that was hanging over the bases for about 2 or 3 sweeps of the radar, and then it disappeared. But when the Americans made the report to the UK, the date was wrong. So, of course, the Ministry of Defense were looking at the wrong night. And by the time we realized the error, the radar tape had been destroyed. The original investigation had been fatally flawed.
但波普并不满足于单纯找出调查中的错误，很快他将遇到一位曾亲手碰过不明飞行物的证人，他画出的飞行物草图与我们此前看到的大相径庭。
It was very clear to me that we did have solid evidence that an unidentified object or objects was operating over the UK.
1980年的圣诞节刚过，60多名空军人员称，在位于英国的北约双基地上空目击到多个不明飞行物。这件事震惊了久经沙场的军人们，包括基地副指挥官查尔斯·哈尔特上校。
I'm thinking, I'm never going to be able to explain this. People will never believe this. This is just too bizarre.
官方从未针对此事给出任何解释，导致目击者都开始质疑自己的亲身经历。直到1994年，英国国防部负责调查不明飞行物事件的官员尼克·波普重新开始调查这件如今臭名昭著的目击悬案。
It was soon clear to me that the original investigation had been fatally flawed.
虽然这些失误造成了一定困难，波普仍进一步深入调查。1994年，他采访了一位事件中的重要证人，负责安全问题的美国空军官员詹姆斯·潘尼斯顿中士。
2 days before Colonel Holt's sighting, Sergeant Peniston had also seen the UFO, and he and 2 other airmen had actually approached this object, and he got close enough to produce some spectacular drawings. Peniston clearly got very close. See the essentially triangular shape here. And it's interesting to note that indentations were found at the landing site in the shape of a triangle, and peak radiation readings were recorded in those 3 indentations.
As the 3 of us got closer to the craft, we started experiencing radio difficulties. The air around us was electrically charged, and we could feel it on our clothes, our skin, and our hair. Nothing in my training prepared me for what I was witnessing.
潘尼斯顿中士对这个飞行物观察了将近45分钟。
One of the most intriguing pieces of information were strange symbols that he saw on the side, which he said reminded him a bit of Egyptian hieroglyphs. And he sketched this in his police notebook.
多年以后，潘尼斯顿中士决定站出来，公开谈论他的目击经历。
Over 80 Air Force personnel, all trained observers, witnessed the takeoff. The team and witnesses were told to treat the investigation as top secret, and no further discussion would be allowed.
I think in looking back at the Rendlesham Forest incident, it was very clear to me that we did have solid evidence of a compelling UFO case, that an unidentified object or objects was operating over the UK.
如今，普遍认为蓝道申森林事件是史上最具说服力的不明飞行物目击事件之一。它与其他可信度高的目击事件都具有若干相似的典型特征：三角形的碟状飞行物移动时悄无声息，能够瞬间加速至未知的速度。
It stands as a benchmark against which all other UFO cases can be measured. And when you add in all the cases that involve high-level military people, government officials, pilots, cases that have been officially investigated, you have a body of evidence that simply can't be ignored.
Here's something very, very strange.
如果整座城市的人都目睹了堪比2-3个足球场大小的不明飞行物，又会怎样呢？
Was the shape of a boomerang.
A large black object coming right towards us.
Thought I was going to pass out. I was so enthralled in looking at this thing.
And I said, that son of a bitch is a mile long.
1997年，美国亚利桑那州菲尼克斯，数千人目击了一个巨大的飞行物。
Do these lights belong to visitors from outer space?
It was being blasted all over the television, so people were going outside of their houses and looking up in the sky.
现在，这个史上最经久不衰的案例出现了新的证据。
All hell broke loose, basically, and we had a complete lockdown.
官方解释受到了质疑。
The Air Force stated that flares were dropped around 10 p.m., but witness reports came in over an hour before the flares were dropped. So using that excuse makes a mockery out of what thousands of people said they saw.
一位美国前州长发表了惊人的言论。
I knew more about the lights over Phoenix than I let on.
这个事件就是菲尼克斯之光。
I'm Fife Symington, the former governor of Arizona, and in the spring of 1997, there was a very unusual event that occurred while I was the governor. I guess some people refer to it as the lights over Phoenix.
It was Thursday night, March 13th, 1997, 8:30 p.m.
My daughter Monica came running in to say there was something coming over the end of Camelback Mountain. And so 4 of the kids got up, ran out, and I ran out with them.
And I looked to the north. My wife and I saw 3 bright white lights in triangle formation coming right towards us.
It had 5 big lights in front, and it was the shape of a boomerang.
It was a solid craft, silent, very low to the ground. And the thing that took me was the size. Profoundly enormous, profoundly massive. I mean, we don't even have shopping centers this big.
We stood and watched it come, and it floated directly over our house. And it was probably 5 to 6 minutes that we had full view of this.
My wife and I, we just stared at each other. And I looked her right in the eye and I says, we just saw our first UFO.
Do these lights belong to visitors from outer space? Hundreds of people across the valley think it's a distinct possibility.
What is described as a giant, brightly lit boomerang soars through the air. No official explanation of those strange bright lights.
That night, it was being blasted all over the radio, all over the television, so people were going outside of their houses and looking up in the sky, and it was being viewed by thousands of people across the valley. There were barrages of phone calls coming into the governor's office and to the Department of Public Safety. People wanted answers. So, of course, I was making my inquiries immediately to the head of the National Guard. And I had members of my staff calling Luke Air Force Base to find out if they were flying some exotic aircraft over the valley and not really getting any answers. I mean, everybody was just sort of, oh my gosh, well, we don't know what it is.
Something strange happened in the skies over Arizona that still hasn't been fully explained.
It's something UFO enthusiasts are calling a major sighting. Pilots report seeing it in the air, yet military radar screens pick up nothing. Whatever it was, it has more than a few Phoenicians watching the skies tonight.
Well, in the weeks following the incident, over 700 witnesses called in reports to local officials and to the National UFO Reporting Center, a private organization in Seattle, Washington. And these witnesses included pilots, police officers, and military professionals.
尽管人们对飞行物的描述不尽相同，但就几个重要特征达成了高度共识。这个发光的坚实物体呈三角形，相当庞大，在山谷上空移动时悄无声息。最重要的是，目击者从全城多处便于观察的地点同时看到了它。目击总时长达1小时46分钟。
We literally were laying down on the grass, looking up at it.
It was a solid object.
Something that I could never explain.
Real deal.
It was a major UFO event, seen by thousands of people across the state of Arizona, and they were expecting a serious response from the government.
Well, you can imagine the building hysteria that was going on in our community about what really happened and what we were going to do about it.
I'm going to order a full, investigation of this through DPS. We're going to make all the necessary inquiries, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to find out.
I was probing, trying to get answers, but everybody was sort of denying that they saw it in official channels, which really had me perplexed. And Councilwoman Barwood really took the lead. She called Senator John McCain, and the senator was the first person to get something out of the Air Force.
空军告诉麦凯恩参议员，那些强光是国民警卫队在晚上9点30到10点之间发射的高强度照明弹。但当晚8点15就已经出现了目击报告，这比发射照明弹早了1个多小时，且发射地点与飞行物目击地点不一致，因此这无法解释这么多人目击到的景象。
They were all shot right around 10 o'clock at night. They were all southwest of Phoenix. They weren't even over the city or even in the county. What my wife and I saw happened at 8:30.
Seems to me this big object came over at 8:30. The authorities decided they better do something to cover it up, so they had a flare show at 10.
Well, it was an intentional diversion, yes.
What's really confusing is that the lights that were shown on TV that night were actually the flares.
Do these lights belong?
Because the news footage was taken at 10 p.m. when the flares were dropped.
Strange dots of light that were the top of.
But that doesn't explain what all the witnesses saw. The flares were dropped over 2 hours after the sightings began. These were two separate events.
导致人们进一步怀疑空军解释的是这段从未公诸于众的电话录音。这是3月14日早上，美国陆克空军基地的一位飞行员打给国家不明飞行物报告中心的电话。
Apparently, we got a call from Prescott Valley Airport, a small airport north of us, reporting an object that had a near miss with a small Cessna. The call came up approximately 8:32 that they encountered something over Phoenix, Arizona, over the area of 7th Avenue and Indian School Road. They don't know what it was.
飞行员称，8点30分刚过，陆克空军基地便派出2架 F-15飞机去调查此事。2架飞机返航后，他还与其中一位飞行员说了话，并称后者明显受到了刺激。
The command pilot of this particular flight, I've never seen this man scared, and he was scared to death. He's not sure what it was. His statement was that they followed this aircraft. It went on a straight line course heading towards Sky Harbor Airport, which is one of our main airports here, at approximately 18,000 feet, descending to 10,005. He saw 5 distinct lights in a triangular pattern. First 3 lights were in a tight triangular formation, and then the other light was at about 400 yards, also on the east side of the triangle. It scared the hell out of them, and after they landed, the base was we had a complete lockdown.
all hell broke loose, basically, and the facility was closed.
尽管有着惊人的目击证词，空军还是断然否认了这次遭遇。但与此前的蓝道申森林事件相同的是，官方没能成功打消人们的怀疑。
It was the story that wouldn't go away, and the governor knew he would have to address it.
Governor Fife Symington is determined to find out what those lights are all about.
随着塞明顿州长发表了这番惊人的言论，这个事件很快就震惊了全国。
I knew more about the lights over Phoenix than I let on.
To escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party.
It's time to correct the record once and for all. But when you serve in public office, you have to be very careful dealing with sensitive, incendiary subjects like UFO sightings.
So I'm going to order a...
The fact of the matter is, if you're a public official and you start talking about UFOs, you really get attacked. It's unbelievable.
So we start tonight with those strange dots of light.
1997年，约有1万人目睹了一个不明飞行物掠过菲尼克斯上空。据称，该飞行物呈三角形，长度堪比几个足球场。和蓝道申森林事件一样，目击者从全城多处地点同时看到了它，目击总时长达1小时46分钟。
Thousands of people saw it, and there was quite a buildup of public interest, almost close to hysteria.
UFO enthusiasts all over the country.
事件发生3个月后，今日美国在头版刊登了菲尼克斯之光的专题，将塞明顿州长推到了聚光灯下。
In early June, there was some major publicity, and all of a sudden we found ourselves sort of besieged. So I organized this press conference to try to get people to kind of climb off the emotional mountain a bit.
6月19日，塞明顿召开了记者招待会，宣布谜底已经揭晓。
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please. This just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
It really was a very funny spoof, but unfortunately it was taken the wrong way.
It was an insult, and I'm greatly offended, as are many, many witnesses, because a lot of people could have came forward. But instead, they became reclusive. They refused to talk about it because of this, because of the ridicule.
I was angry over it because I know what I saw, and I did not like that kind of attitude. When this thing was over my house for 5 minutes, someone should care. Someone should care.
That press conference, it really did upset a lot of people, and I regret that. But what really bothered me was that I knew more about the lights over Phoenix than I let on. And I should have talked more openly about my own experience sooner. On March 13th, I was having dinner with my family. We had the TV on, and I was well aware of the news about the UFO. So I said, I'm going to jump in my car, and I'm going to go down Lincoln Drive past Squaw Peak and see if I can see what's going on. When I got here, there were people milling around, just enjoying the park. And I was here for probably 5 or 10 minutes, and somebody said, look at that, and out to the northwest, this great big massive craft, probably around 3,000 or 4,000 feet, took out a whole chunk of the sky. And you could see other aircraft in the distance, but airplanes looked like little toothpicks compared to the size of this craft. And it came right at us, made not a sound, and just moved almost sort of gently and smoothly, not that fast. It just glided over Squaw Peak. And we had a magnificent view of it silhouetted.
塞明顿州长观察了将近1分钟，那个物体才加速离开了山谷。
It just all of a sudden disappeared. You know, I've served in the U.S. Air Force, and I've been flying all my adult life. And I've never seen anything like that before. It obviously had unbelievable aeronautical capabilities, something way beyond anything we have in our inventory, that's for sure. But I thought, I best be quiet about it because I'm the governor, and if I go start talking about it, it's going to create more hysteria, and one should not lose sight of the fact that I had a state to run.
塞明顿在第2届任期内仍然对此保持沉默，但将近15年后的记者招待会上，这位前州长吸取的教训成为所有公职人员的前车之鉴。
I think as far as government is concerned, we're sort of driven to always have an explanation for everything. And it's hard for government entities to say, I don't know. We can't explain it and admit to complete vulnerability.
And now I'll ask off.
But I learned a hard lesson about this subject based on personal experience. Public officials need to be more open and more courageous in dealing with issues like this. We need to deal with it legitimately and objectively. And if we don't know what it was, then we should say, we don't know what it was. It's time to square up and do the right thing.
人们对菲尼克斯之光中不明飞行物的细节仍存在激烈的争议，这个事件也仍悬而未决。但这次事件反映出不明飞行物的调查迫切需要政府启动官方程序来受理并调查人们的报告。
As it stands now, for people in the United States, there is no official body for them to go to if some kind of event takes place, which they feel needs to be reported. And what's interesting is that in terms of the aviation community, the FAA has actually told its employees in its manual that if they see a UFO, they are not to tell the FAA about it. So they're actually saying right in their manual that we, the US government, do not want to hear anything about UFO sightings.
Pilots and people in the aviation community in particular make excellent witnesses. But very often, when they see UFOs, they don't go on the record because they fear that their careers will suffer.
And it's a real problem because it makes the case harder to report, and it really limits the available data on the phenomenon.
这些目击报告既没有机构受理，又经常沦为笑柄，导致最终无法精确记录不明飞行物的活动频率。但是如此一来，便会给航空等行业带来严重的安全隐患。假如这些不明飞行物确实存在，那么一旦和飞机在空中相撞，就会带来灾难性后果。
Hey, David, this is from United Tower. Did you see a flying disc out by C-17? I have not seen anything, Sue. And if I did, I wouldn't admit to it.
菲尼克斯之光发生之后不到10年，所谓的不明飞行物再次出现在美国一处最繁忙的机场。
Several pilots and United Airlines workers swear they saw one, a UFO.
Definitely, it was not an airplane as we know it.
哗众取宠的不明飞行物报告在网络上比比皆是，这使得区分真伪难上加难。少数专家采用严谨的科学标准来评估不明飞行物目击事件中出现的证据。其中一位专家便是资深记者莱斯利·基恩。
I've been looking into the UFO subject for about 10 years, always focused on the hardcore factual information. Radar evidence, the photographic evidence, the physical evidence that have been studied in laboratories, and not on more conspiracy-oriented material that's floating out in the culture and all over the internet. In January of 2007, I was struck by an amazing story that was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. A number of employees of United Airlines witnessed a disc-shaped object. It looked like a metallic disc hovering over the United Airlines terminal, specifically over gate C-17. And this was at rush hour, a busy afternoon around 4:30. It was seen by a lot of people on the ground. It was seen by pilots, by crew members, by managers, by people that were moving planes around. It was estimated to be about 22 to 88 feet. And they said that it was hovering over gate C-17 for at least 5 minutes. And then the thing suddenly just shot up, directly up through the cloud bank above it and cut a crisp hole through it, very clean, like a cookie cutter. The witnesses, trained aviation professionals, were confounded by what they had seen.
I've been at O'Hare for quite some time, and I'll tell you definitely it was not an airplane as we know it.
奥黑尔国际机场事件又给不断增加的不明飞行物事件添加了数据。此次事件也体现出一些共性：这个碟状物体无声盘旋，能够瞬间加速到未知的速度。不过，最关键的证据还未公布。
Hey, dude, this is from United Tower. Hey, did you see a flying disc out by C-17? It was start soon.
事件发生几个月后，基恩获得了一份管制塔台录音带的拷贝，其中包括一段未公开的电话录音，记录了一位美国联合航空公司管理人员的目击证词。
Okay, I'm sorry. What can I do for you now? All right. I told Dave there was a disc flying outside above Charlie 17, and he thought it was pretty much high. But I'm not high and I'm not drinking. Yeah. Someone actually has a picture of it. So if you guys see it out there, a disc, like a frisbee, like a UFO type thing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hey, I'll keep a field eye for that. All right. Okay. Bye.
This is, very, very important evidence. It shows that there was something there. It was reported to the tower, but it was still treated like some kind of a joke. And I believe that that's at least partly due to the FAA policy of discouraging UFO reports. Even though this was in restricted airspace, a busy airport in the middle of rush hour, and nobody knew what this thing was going to do. I mean, this was a serious hazard. So the FAA initially didn't say anything, but once these tapes were released, they had to say something.
迫于公众压力，目击事件2个月后，美国联邦航空管理局草草给出解释。
Well, the first thing that the FAA told people was that this was some kind of light reflection off the bottom of the cloud bank. They said it was the airport lights can do funny things on the clouds. But the problem is the airport lights had not even been turned on yet. The second explanation that the FAA gave was that it was a weather phenomenon, most likely what is called a hole punch cloud. A hole punch cloud is a natural phenomenon that is caused by ice crystals falling from above a cloud down to a cloud bank below and melting a hole in the cloud. The problem is you have to have freezing temperatures for this to occur. Well, we know for a fact that it was too warm at O'Hare that day. The temperatures were not below freezing at the level of the cloud bank. So it is an absolute physical impossibility for that event to have been caused by a hole punch cloud. Ultimately, the O'Hare case and the FAA response to it are typical of how the U.S. government handles UFO sightings. First, they avoid having to talk about it at all, but if that becomes impossible, the authorities will just throw out whatever explanation they think might fit, whether it's plausible or not. And it's a real problem. This has happened countless times for decades. It's a standard operating procedure for cases like this.
尽管现状如此，美国政府曾有一段时期鼓励对该类事件进行公开的科学研究，甚至希望尽可能收集目击报告。
For the past 3 years, a large number of perfectly sane and reliable people have been involved in this flying saucer business. We read about them, talk about them, wonder about these reports of strange phenomena in the skies.
I'm inclined to believe that it's of an extraterrestrial origin.
Back in the 50s and 60s, there were a lot of sightings that were being reported. There was a lot of coverage in the media, and officials could not figure out what was going on. And it was during the Cold War, so there was heightened concern in the general public about unexplained things in the sky. So the U.S. government set up an agency within the Air Force called Project Blue Book, and its purpose was to take reports from the public and to investigate cases.
蓝皮书计划于1952年正式启动，5名职员仅在第1年就收到了1500多份报告。
I was driving north on 101 highway at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I noticed a terrific blue flash past the nose of my airplane.
I looked to my right, and there in the sky were 3 tubes of fluorescent light.
And it went over me, practically right over my head. The object traveled in a straight line. I counted 8 of them, proceeding directly out to sea. And I began to hear a hissing, whistling sort of a sound.
A beautiful, silvery, pink-tinged moonlight.
1952年到1969年期间，蓝皮书计划共收到12000多份不明飞行物报告，其中近800份仍然悬而未决。 他们很快发现，目击报告的数量远非这个小小的空军下属机构所能应付。
Blue Book was plagued from the start. It was understaffed, incompetent in certain ways, and eventually it just became like a public relations exercise for the Air Force. So in 1966, it was decided that its future would hinge on a government-funded study commissioned at the University of Colorado.
领导该项目的是爱德华·康登博士，他是一位物理学家，曾担任美国国家标准局的负责人。
Condon was biased against UFOs from the beginning. In fact, in a 1967 article, he was quoted as saying, "My attitude is there's nothing to it. But I'm not supposed to reach that conclusion for another year."
康登的报告于1968年完成，将近1500页的篇幅中，也有一些具有参考价值的分析。但是康登亲自撰写的2页总结却基本忽略了这些分析。他宣称没有证据能够支持对不明飞行物的进一步科学研究。1969年12月，空军宣布蓝皮书计划终止，4月生效。在此之后，该报告被官员和科学家无数次引用，以证明没有必要进行不明飞行物研究。
It's really a tragedy. I mean, this was the only official investigation by our government. When it closed, the golden age of UFO study in America was over.
1970年开始出现了许多事件，对终止蓝皮书计划的支持者构成挑战。而1986年，阿拉斯加州安克雷奇附近发生了一次急需认真对待的目击事件。
Yeah, that's 1-2 again. On some other equipment here, we have confirmed there is a flight size of 2 around your 1550 squawk. Where is he following us? It looks like he is, yes.
此次事件中，有着30年飞行经验的机长以自己的名誉担保。一个巨大飞行物跟踪了他近1个小时。此次事件提供了迄今为止持续时间最长的不明飞行物数据，并成为直城白宫的确凿证据。
They were all excited about it. So I said, "What do you think it is?" He says, "Well, it's a UFO."